Have you ever paused to wonder, why does your dog insist on sleeping near your bed, even when you gently usher him out of the room? Do you notice how he watches you with an attentiveness that transcends mere obedience? Or how sometimes he quietly appears precisely when you feel like crying, before the tears have even begun to fall? Carl Jung, one of the 20th century's most profound psychologists, didn't believe in coincidence, and what he both penned and cautioned about regarding our canine companions goes far beyond what traditional science would dare to assert. What you're about to discover might not just transform your relationship with your pet, but also unlock deep, hidden aspects of your own soul. Because, according to Jung, perhaps the dog living under your roof isn't merely keeping you company. Perhaps he's trying to shield you from something you can't see yourself. Jung's warning didn't arrive as a headline or a manifesto. It came softly between the lines, like all truths too powerful to shout from the rooftops. He keenly observed animal behavior, especially that of dogs, around his patients, and he began to perceive what few dared to notice. Dogs seemed to grasp what people concealed: their long-standing pains, their most secret wounds, their unspoken emotions. Jung spoke of archetypes, primal images residing within us since humanity's dawn, and dogs, in his view, embodied one of these living archetypes, the guardian of the soul. At first glance, this idea may seem absurd. How could a dog safeguard a soul? But Jung wasn't speaking literally. He was speaking of symbols, and for him, everything surrounding us, from dreams to daily relationships, could carry profound meaning emanating from the subconscious. Dogs weren't simply loyal animals, they were living symbols of what teeters on the edge of our awareness. And when they appear with their watchful gaze and constant presence, it signifies that something within us craves healing, protection, a reunion with forgotten aspects of ourselves. There are records of patients recounting striking episodes. One woman told Jung that whenever she experienced self-destructive thoughts, her dog would bark at the wall, always the same spot, as if defending her from an unseen presence. Another man, mired in deep depression, confessed he could only rise from bed because his dog looked at him with such profound sorrow, he felt compelled to respond. "It's as if he knows what's happening to me," he said. Jung didn't dismiss these stories. On the contrary, he meticulously documented them, and gradually he began to understand that these animals weren't simply present. They were on a mission. A dog's presence in a human's life, Jung argued, could be an external reflection of an internal need. Dogs appeared during moments of rupture, grief, existential emptiness. They didn't fill this void with words, but with their presence. They didn't heal with advice, but with a gaze. They didn't judge, they didn't demand. They simply were. And this, according to Jung, was a symbolic reminder of what our own soul was trying to offer us: acceptance, presence, inner fidelity. How often in the bustle of modern life do we ignore our own pain? How often do we cast off parts of ourselves to the wayside, as if unworthy of love? In this context, the dog becomes a unique being, one that returns, insists, lies beside us, even when we lack the strength to reciprocate love. For Jung, this was a living expression of the saint archetype. But here lies the most subtle nuance of Jung's insight, and perhaps the most uncomfortable. For if a dog is a symbol of the most loyal and protective part of the soul, then how we treat these animals speaks volumes about how we treat ourselves. Have you ever snapped at your dog in a moment of stress? Ignored him when he approached, simply to touch his nose to your hand? Pushed him away because he was in the way? Jung warned that these small, repetitive actions aren't harmless. They're a symbolic reflection of how we deal with our repressed emotions, of how we push away what could heal us. The dog, in this instance, embodies the part of our being that insists on care, even when everything is crumbling, and to push him away is often the same as rejecting our own need for love. Have you ever wondered why a dog is called man's best friend? Not only because of loyalty, it's because he reminds us of a forgotten truth: love needs no words. And perhaps that's precisely why he troubles us so deeply, because he shows us what we've lost, trying to be too strong, too independent, too rational. Jung said the unconscious finds creative, sometimes painful, ways to manifest, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in illness, and more often than we realize, in animals. When you begin to notice peculiar behaviors in your dog, barking for no reason, whimpering for no apparent cause, hiding without visible justification. Perhaps what you're witnessing isn't merely a biological reaction. Perhaps it's a symbol, a warning, a mirror, and scariest of all, perhaps he feels what you haven't dared to feel yet. Perhaps he sees what you've chosen to ignore. Because dogs, as Jung said, have no ego. They wear no masks, and therefore they're more attuned to the truth than we are. They sense pain before it surfaces. They feel sorrow before it becomes visible. They anticipate danger before it names itself. And they stay, even when you can't stay for yourself. But are we ready to heed this message? Or will we continue to treat our dogs merely as pets, disregarding their symbolic potential? Jung didn't want us to treat dogs like gods. But he also cautioned, if you ignore the symbol, you ignore the soul, and thereby you close doors that may never open again. Therefore, he insisted, observe, feel, notice. Your dog's behavior may be trying to tell you something, and perhaps what he's trying to say is precisely what your deepest self already knows, but doesn't dare admit. And now I ask you, what has your dog been trying to show you in recent days? What does he sense that you refuse to feel? What does he see that you're not yet willing to see? These questions might seem simple, but they possess transformative power, because in attempting to answer them, you not only draw closer to your animal, you draw closer to yourself, and you might discover that the four-legged creature who follows you around the house and curls up in your lap during difficult times isn't just a dog. It's a living symbol of a soul that, even wounded, still wants to care for you. In the end, Carl Jung wasn't talking about dogs. He was talking about you, about your shadow, about your pain, about your silent quest for love, and about how sometimes, when all seems lost, life sends an answer. It doesn't arrive as a grand revelation. It arrives in the form of soft footsteps, a wet nose, and non-judgmental eyes. It arrives in silence. It arrives in the form of a dog. But is a dog really just watching you? Or is he trying to save you from something you haven't yet understood? You might only find the answer to that in the next part. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing a dog understands us better than any human. Perhaps it's due to the silence, or the lack of judgment, or that almost imperceptible gesture when he wordlessly rests his head on your legs, as if knowing what we need most isn't words, but simply presence. Deep down, most of us don't remember the precise moment we began to feel the world growing colder, more rushed, more mechanical. But we all remember that instance when the family dog approached us for no apparent reason, and in that simple gesture, we sensed someone genuinely saw us. And the curious thing is, this doesn't depend on the life we lead. It could be a 60-year-old woman who, after her husband's death, began conversing with her dog as if he were her departed life partner, or a 41-year-old man who, after a quiet divorce, found in his Labrador the only listener who demanded no explanations, or a 35-year-old emotionally exhausted woman who discovered she could only truly cry when her dog lay in her lap. In all these instances, the dog doesn't solve the problems. He translates them. He transforms them into gazes, into subtle signs of attention, into a fidelity that only the soul understands. And this has a profound impact, especially on those who've already lost faith in human connections. But what if the dog isn't simply expressing love? What if, as Jung argued, he's expressing the part of us we've forgotten to care for, the part that's faithful, sensitive, quiet, and which, over time, we push deep down inside ourselves? Because we do that, don't we? Gradually, we become hardened for survival, out of necessity, out of fear of being hurt. We pretend we don't feel, we say, everything's fine, when it's not. And in this attempt to survive, we forget that within us, there's a place that still craves connection, truth, acceptance. And that's where the dog appears, as a living reminder of what we neglect in our feelings. Carl Jung believed that every emotional symptom is a message from the soul trying to express itself. Anxiety, chronic sadness, inexplicable emptiness, these aren't defects, they're symbols. It's the subconscious saying, pay attention, but how do you look inward when everything around you demands we look outward? When clocks hurry us, social media compares us, and the world demands results? It's here that the archetype of the dog becomes even more valuable, because he calls us to the present. He doesn't demand we be better, faster, or stronger. He simply wants to be near, and unconsciously invites us to do the same with our own soul, to sit beside it, to breathe with it, to be with it. Imagine a Sunday afternoon, silence in the house. You've done everything you need to do, washed the dishes, done the laundry, answered the messages. But despite this, a feeling of unease lingers. You sit on the couch, and without noticing, your dog approaches. No sound, just his presence. You slowly stroke him, and in this gesture, something inside you is released. You don't know why, but tears begin to flow. You didn't even realize you still wanted to cry. And it's in that moment, in that very moment, the soul begins to breathe again, because someone saw it. And perhaps that someone has 4 paws. Such scenes are more common than we think, and they aren't figments of romanticism. They're living manifestations of the subconscious seeking a way to manifest. Jung called this synchronicity, when something external precisely mirrors what's happening within us. Dogs, with their inexplicable sensitivity, are masters at facilitating this process. They don't interpret, they don't try to change, they simply reflect, and therefore they awaken a forgotten part within us, the capacity to be kind to ourselves. But something even deeper happens here, and many notice it. How often have you heard stories of dogs saving lives, warning of danger, refusing to leave a person who's suffering? Science tries to explain this with instincts. Jung preferred to view such instances as symbolic manifestations, because in his view, when the soul teeters on the brink of rupture, the universe finds ways to protect it, and often this protection comes in the form of a dog who refuses to leave you alone, a dog who wakes you up when you want to sleep all day, a dog who insists on following you when all you want is to run away from the world. In 2025, we're experiencing a quiet crisis, an internal disconnection. People work, produce, publish, smile, but they don't feel, or rather they feel, but can't name what they feel, and therefore they become ill, emotionally, physically, in their relationships. It's in this situation that the archetype of the dog, as a symbol of the caring soul, becomes more necessary than ever, because he doesn't need to understand you to love you. He simply needs you to stop, to be near, and perhaps to begin listening to what your heart has been trying to tell you for many years, but only now has found a way to surface. Jung said the healing process begins when we stop running from ourselves, and that symbols, dreams, and connections with the living world are bridges to this reunion. The dog, in this context, isn't merely an animal that lives with us. He's a bridge, a reminder, a shout from the soul saying, "I'm still here." That's why a dog's presence can be so transformative, especially for those who've forgotten what it's like to be looked at with tenderness, for those who for decades have been strong, carrying invisible burdens, supporting families, projects, hiding pain, for those who wake up in the middle of the night with a heavy heart and don't know why, for those who've become accustomed to living on autopilot. In this situation, the dog offers a healing presence, not magic, but because in being with him, we're invited to be ourselves. And perhaps that's the most profound thing of all. Jung didn't want his teachings to remain locked in books. He wanted them to be lived, integrated, inspired. And one of the most powerful ways to do this is through symbolic observation of daily life, to observe your dog as a symbol, as a mirror, as a messenger, and also as an opportunity for connection, for reconciliation with what has been forgotten, within you and without. If you feel ready to delve deeper into this, to embody what Jung was trying to show us, there's a simple, yet profoundly effective path you can take each day. The ebook, Jung's Method and People, 5 minutes a day for inner peace and clarity of mind, was created precisely for this purpose, to help you transform this symbolic vision into a living experience, reconnecting with what is essential within you. It's available in the pinned comment to this video, because sometimes all a soul needs is a small gesture of connection, a safe place where it can finally breathe again. Have you ever wondered why dogs dream? Have you noticed how, at night, they move restlessly, as if running in another dimension? Some tremble, others make soft noises, sometimes even whimper, even in their sleep. But what are they experiencing there, in that space between the visible and the invisible? Science will say it's merely a nervous reflex, a reorganization of the brain during the REM phase of sleep. But what if it's not only that? What if, as Jung believed, dreams, both in humans and animals, are the language of the soul, a portal between worlds, a quiet attempt to show us what we ignore during the day? Carl Jung didn't only talk about human dreams. In his research, he pondered the psychic processes flowing through all forms of life. And interestingly, many of his patients recounted similar situations with their dogs, animals that suddenly changed behavior, seeming to foreshadow a death in the family. They'd become sick alongside their owners, and sometimes die within days, as if they'd absorbed an emotional burden that didn't belong to them. Jung took these accounts seriously. For him, there existed a symbolic, often energetic bridge between the psychic field of humans and the animals that live with us. Dogs, with their extreme sensitivity, were the first to pick up on imbalances, unresolved conflicts, buried emotions. Have you ever experienced something similar? A situation where your dog reacted before you yourself understood what you were feeling? Share it in the comments. Your story might resonate with the soul of someone experiencing something similar, but hasn't yet found the courage to name it. Jung called this symbolic contagion, the phenomenon whereby a symbol begins to affect reality, not as magic, but as a natural manifestation of the psyche. In this context, the dog becomes not just a sensitive animal, but an emotional amplifier. He doesn't just sense your pain, he reflects it, carries it, and often attempts to transform it using the only means available to him, his presence. That's precisely why some dogs develop autoimmune diseases after many years of living alongside emotionally broken owners, or begin to exhibit compulsive behaviors when living in unstable environments. They are, as Jung would say, the living shadow of the home, what no one sees, but what the dog feels. He carries it within himself and attempts to cleanse it. And the most impressive thing? They do this without any reward, desiring nothing in return. They simply are, simply love, simply stay, even when everyone else leaves. And how about you? How do you react to this? Do you notice when your dog is trying to show you something? Or have you, like many of us, learned to ignore these subtle signals, labeling them as whims or dog quirks? This is the great, quiet tragedy of modernity. We've lost sensitivity to the subtle. We connect with the world through screens, but disconnect from everything that quietly pulsates. We live surrounded by symbols, but no longer know how to interpret them. And the dog, a being who approaches us without masks, ultimately becomes just another element of the routine. Although in reality, he's perhaps the only one who still insists on reminding us who we are. Have you ever noticed how your dog reacts when you're about to make an important decision? Have you observed his behavior when you enter an unfamiliar house or meet a new person? Jung believed that such moments shouldn't be ignored. For him, the dog was an emotional oracle, a living bridge between instinct and the unconscious. When he barks for no reason, when he refuses to enter certain rooms, or when he insists on staying close to you in certain situations, perhaps he's trying to say, pay attention, something isn't right. Do we listen to him? Perhaps the greatest challenge of modernity is to redefine how we listen to what isn't spoken. Emotions that aren't expressed in words, gestures that don't shout, inexplicable silences, because it's in these that the soul reveals itself. It's in these that symbolism manifests. And the dog, with his ancient intuition, bodily wisdom and boundless devotion, can become the key to this universe we've lulled to sleep. But beware, this sensitivity of dogs isn't one-sided. Just as they feel and absorb, they also need emotional care. When we ignore their signals, when we don't respect their boundaries, when we treat their reactions as caprices, we wound more than just the animal. We silence the mirror of our own soul. Have you ever noticed how some dogs isolate themselves when they sense their owners are emotionally unstable, as if they withdraw to avoid absorbing even more? Or how others, on the contrary, become excessively excitable, trying by any means to draw attention to something you haven't even noticed? These aren't accidental. They're symbolic language. It's the unconscious trying to break through the veil of rationality through the only channel that's still open, the emotional bond with the dog. And when we ignore this, something within us also closes, because it's not the dog trying to heal us, it's life through him. Jung said that animals are symbols not only in dreams, they're also symbols in flesh and blood, living representations of deep aspects of the psyche. The dog, with his unconditional devotion, capacity to be present, and quiet form of love, embodies the archetype of the inner guardian. That part of us that remains even in the face of pain, that doesn't give up, that insists on reminding us that there's something worthy of love within us, even when we ourselves can't believe it. Perhaps that's why so many stories of people who were able to overcome deep depression, addiction, and trauma have one common element: the presence of a dog, not as a medicine, but as a symbol, as a guide, as a mirror, as a wordless witness to a soul that was on the edge of an abyss, but was saved not by words or formulas, but by eyes that saw without judging, paws that approached without fear, and a heart that beat in time with what the person didn't even suspect still existed: internal hope. And perhaps now is the perfect time for you to reflect. How do you treat the animal that accompanies you? Do you notice him, or do you simply live with him? Do you listen to what he's trying to tell you? Or are you still trying to convince yourself that he's just a dog? Write in the comments if something in your dog's behavior has caught your attention. A repeating habit, a glance during difficult moments, a behavior that seemed more human than you expected. This exchange might open doors, not just for you, but for others who also need a reminder that they aren't alone on this journey. Because sometimes the soul speaks, only it doesn't speak with words. It speaks with symbols, gestures, its presence. And in many cases, it speaks with a bark. In 1983, a psychiatric hospital in Scotland documented an unusual phenomenon. Over 6 months, several patients with severe diagnoses of depression and dissociative disorders began to show significant improvement. Not after taking new medications, but after the simple implementation of an experimental program, the daily presence of dogs in the inner courtyard. Skeptical doctors were surprised to observe how patients who had previously spent days in absolute silence began to talk to the dogs. Others, who refused to accept visitors, began to leave their rooms to accompany the dogs on walks. Data obtained later proved even more unexpected. 73% of these patients reduced the number of emotional crises by 40% after 12 weeks of regular interaction with dogs. But why does this happen? What is it about this quiet connection between humans and dogs that transcends logic and even challenges traditional medicine? Carl Jung had already provided clues about this connection. For him, dogs weren't just loyal companions. They were living transmitters of suppressed emotions, walking symbols that trigger an emotional integration process within us that we don't even suspect. They break down protective barriers, reduce resistance, and touch on what is hidden. An even more impressive fact is provided by modern neurobiology. When we look into a dog's eyes, oxytocin is released in the human brain, the same hormone that's involved in creating bonds between mothers and children. This means that from a biological perspective, our bodies recognize dogs as part of our emotional core. They calm us, relax our nervous systems, and help us restructure emotions. However, Jung saw something more than just biology. For him, this deep connection with dogs had archetypal roots. It was a living manifestation of the ancient bond between humans and the guardian of the soul. The dog, as an archetype, is present in ancient myths, fairy tales, and modern dreams, fulfilling the same role: protecting, guiding, and passing through the shadows alongside the hero. Have you ever seen a dog in a dream? Have you ever wondered what he meant in that dream? Jung believed that when a dog appears in the dream world, he's alerting us to aspects of the psyche that are ready to manifest. And when they appear in waking life in symbolic form, through unusual encounters, unusual behaviors, a persistent desire to stay near us, it means that something inside us is ready for change. In a 1947 lecture, Jung mentioned a curious story. One of his patients recounted recurring episodes when his dog barked desperately before panic attacks. At first, the man thought it was a coincidence, but after he identified a pattern, he realized that the dog's behavior was a kind of premonition. He foreshadowed an emotional breakdown even before the patient realized it was approaching. For Jung, this was a classic example of synchronicity, where the external world symbolically and meaningfully reflects an internal movement. And the dog, in this case, acted as a messenger, a sensor, a guardian. Such manifestations aren't rare. In many homes, especially among more introverted and melancholic people, dogs become almost emotional translators. They change behavior when their owners change inside. Some become more excitable when tension arises. Others withdraw when they sense the emotional pain of those around them. There are cases where dogs refuse to leave a specific person in the house, and after some time, it turns out that this person was on the verge of a crisis. Coincidence? Jung would say, a symbol. And perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of this connection is silence. Unlike human interactions, which often require justifications, explanations, and emotional defenses, the dog offers a presence that doesn't demand, doesn't intrude, doesn't ask. He simply is. And paradoxically, it's precisely in this void of words that many people find the space to hear themselves for the first time. Because the dog doesn't only accept, he allows. He allows us to be vulnerable. He allows us to cry. He allows us not to know what to do. And for a wounded soul, this is more valuable than any advice. Have you ever experienced this? Have there been moments when, even surrounded by people, a dog's gaze saved you from the abyss? Share it in the comments. Sometimes your story can become the thread that returns a lost sense of meaning to someone. There's also a cultural aspect that we often ignore. In various traditions, dogs are considered spiritual guides. In ancient Egypt, Anubis, the god of death and the passage of souls, was depicted with the head of a dog or jackal. For the ancient Greeks, Cerberus, the three-headed dog, guarded the entrance to the underworld. In many shamanic cultures, the spirit of the dog is invoked to protect healing rituals. This isn't accidental. These archetypal images pass through the centuries because they represent something deep, a presence that accompanies us when we plunge into darkness, a fear that doesn't run away when the lights go out. And what does all this have to do with your daily life? Everything. Because even if you don't believe in mythology, even if you've never read Jung, you feel it. You feel that in this animal who accompanies you every day, there's something that goes beyond the routine, that transcends the everyday, that somehow sees you whole, even the parts you've tried to hide from everyone. In this sense, the dog isn't just a passive observer. He's a mirror that never lies. And perhaps that's why so many people say that the pain of losing a dog is more devastating than the loss of many human connections. Because with the dog, there were no masks, no games, no pretenses. There was only the truth. And when the truth leaves, something in us also leaves. Something we can't always name, but what we feel as an internal rupture that's difficult to heal. Jung argued that every emotional connection that passes through time and silence holds within it the seed of transcendence. And dogs, with their unconditional devotion, teach us this day after day. They show us what life would be like if listening were more important than speaking, if presence were valued more than appearance, if love were simpler, but also deeper. The question remains, what is your dog trying to teach you that you haven't yet been able to understand? Perhaps he persistently follows you around the house not out of need, but because he senses you've lost yourself. Perhaps he lies at the door not by chance, but because he intuitively feels you need protection. Perhaps he looks at you in silence for a long time because, deep down, he's trying to awaken in you what has long been asleep, your capacity to feel. And this, in itself, would already be sufficient reason to rethink how we look at these companions of life. But if we go further, if we allow ourselves to see the dog as a symbol, a mirror, an archetype, we might discover that what we were looking for outside was possibly nearby all along, in the quiet devotion of a being who never asked us to be perfect, but simply to be there. Because sometimes all a soul needs to breathe again is someone who will listen to it without saying a word. And dogs, perhaps more than any other creature in this world, know how to do that. There's a certain, almost imperceptible moment when everything changes. It's never when your dog barks. It's never when he wags his tail. It's when he simply looks at you, for long seconds, in a silence that seems to suspend time. In that moment, you feel something that has no name, but has weight. Something squeezes your chest without causing pain, as if it were a presence that says, I'm here, and I know what you're going through. And the most striking thing is that he really does know. He feels, he picks up on it. And in that brief contact, something inside you begins to give way. The mask slips, the shame lessens, and what you buried appears, your humanity. All previous parts of this immersion in Carl Jung and dogs as living symbols have touched on one common theme: the invisible psyche that cries out in silence, the shadow that tries to be seen, the intuition that whispers. But in this part, We go beyond perception. Now it's time to integrate, to understand what all this really means in your life. Have you ever noticed that dogs don't care about your achievements? That your position, your status, your social victories don't matter to them? They approach you when you're vulnerable, when you fail, when you make mistakes. They seek you out not at the summit, but in the abyss. And this speaks more to the value of connection than any psychological theory. Dogs don't interact with your ego. They connect with your essence. That's precisely why Carl Jung said that connections with animals are often deeper than with humans, because animals are untangled in the web of the ego. They're free, they're pure. That's precisely why they can reach the most honest part of us. When a dog insists on lying next to someone who's suffering, he's not just offering comfort. He's symbolically signaling that there's a field of pain here that needs to be seen, accepted, touched. He acts as a mirror of healing. Have you ever noticed how dogs behave during family arguments? Or how they react when someone in the house is emotionally ill? Or even how they avoid certain places or people without any rational explanation? They don't react to the obvious. They pick up on subtle layers of reality. Jung would say that they're in contact with the collective unconscious of the environment. And this isn't mysticism. It's the symbol in action. It's the psyche speaking through the animal's body. And the most important question, why does this matter? Because we live in an age when everything has become excessive. Information, stimuli, speed. But the most important thing is disappearing. Silence, contact, sensitivity. Dogs become walking reminders of what we've left behind. They remind us of the pause, the touch, the love that doesn't need to be explained. They, as Jung would point out, are small manifestations of the self, the truest essence of our being, who walk beside us every day, trying to return us to ourselves. And when we ignore these signs, when we treat dogs as mere pets, as noise, as a distraction, we ignore entire parts of our psyche that are begging us to listen to them. A dog that growls at the door for no reason may be picking up on an energy you've suppressed. A dog that refuses to leave your room may be trying to protect you from an internal collapse you haven't yet named. And what do? We scold. We order silence. We close the door. Exactly the same way we deal with our own pain. And here, the truth becomes uncomfortable. Perhaps the problem isn't with the dog. Perhaps the problem is what he reveals about you. But this isn't about guilt. It's about consciousness. The dog isn't here to punish you. He's here to remind you of who you were, of who you are, and above all, of who you can still become. In this awareness, there's something deeply transformative. In looking at your dog and honestly asking, what are you trying to show me? What are you carrying that isn't yours? What do you feel for me that I haven't had the courage to feel for myself? The answer may not be expressed in words. Perhaps it will be expressed in a longer gaze, in a repeating gesture, in a persistent presence. But it will come, and when it comes, it will be like a ray of light piercing through darkness. You'll begin to notice that your dog doesn't just live with you. He's trying to teach you something. And what he teaches isn't complicated. It isn't theoretical. It isn't intellectual. It's intuitive. He teaches you that it's possible to love unconditionally, to be together without demands, to forgive without requiring explanations. Jung said that when a symbol becomes conscious, it begins to transform us. And the dog, as a symbol, can become the beginning of a deep process of reunion with oneself. By seeing him, you begin to see yourself. By understanding him, you begin to understand yourself. By listening to him, you begin to hear what your soul has been trying to tell you for many years. And in this process, something changes. Old pains begin to fade. Memories you previously avoided begin to find a voice. And most beautifully, you begin to return to yourself, to return to the center, to return to what has been forgotten, but has never stopped beating. The dog isn't a therapist, but he is a portal. And perhaps, after all that's been said, the question will no longer be, what does my dog want from me? But, what am I finally ready to see through him? The answer doesn't necessarily have to arrive immediately, but it will come. And when it comes, it will be impossible to ignore. Now that you've understood all this, you're possibly wondering, how do I apply this in practice? How do I begin to live this symbolism in daily life, rather than just as a reflection? This is precisely what we'll build together in the next part. Deep, sensitive, and applicable step by step, so that this knowledge becomes life. because wisdom that isn't embodied is useless, and what you experience with your dog can become the beginning of your sincere healing. There comes a moment, even for the most resilient, when life demands change, not as a request, but as a calling, a quiet calling that comes from within, sometimes in the form of unyielding fatigue, sometimes in the form of nameless tears, sometimes in the insistent gaze of a dog who seems to see the soul you've tried to hide. And if you've reached this place, listening to every word of this video, it isn't accidental. Something inside you is ready to go beyond reflections, ready for action. But where do you begin? The first answer possibly lies not in big gestures, but in small rituals, in daily life, where the symbol lives and breathes. Therefore, the plan I offer you here isn't a rigid guide, but a living path, a path that's built day by day, with presence, with intention, with soul. First, the ritual of quiet listening. Every day, set aside 5 minutes to be with your dog in absolute silence. No commands, no cell phone, no distractions. Simply sit near him, breathe, observe. Allow your mind to slow down until you can truly be there, with him, with yourself. This simple ritual is a portal. It takes you out of the superficial state and returns you to presence. And it's in this state that the deepest answers begin to appear. Second, the symbolic journal. Begin to record your dog's unusual behaviors, moments when he changed his mood, avoided certain places, approached you, or was restless for no apparent reason. Alongside these entries, note what emotional state you were in that day. Over time, you'll begin to notice patterns that will show how your dog reacts, not to the external world, but to your internal world. This practice will teach you to interpret the symbols of your life more clearly and sensitively. Third, the mirror of love. Observe how you react to your dog. When he bothers you, when he demands attention, when he insists. Ask yourself, what in myself am I rejecting in the same way? What in him am I pushing away that is actually part of me trying to manifest? This exercise transforms the connection with your animal into an emotional mirror. You begin to understand that discomfort doesn't always come from another person. It's often a reflection of what we don't accept in ourselves. Fourth, the intuitive walk. At least once a week, go for a walk with your dog without a specific destination. Allow him to lead you. Go where he wants to go. Stop where he wants to stop. Sit when he lies down. Go when he moves. This exercise is more than just physical activity. It's a practice of surrender, a practice of trust, a connection with instinct, yours and his. You'll be surprised by the sensations that arise when you let go of control. Fifth, evening gratitude. Before bed, approach your dog. Touch him, not only with your hand, but also with your heart. Thank him in silence or aloud for everything he showed you that day, for the company, for listening to you, for the truth. This simple action evokes a powerful energy. Gratitude. Gratitude is the fuel for transformation. Sixth, symbolic care. Take care of your dog as you would take care of yourself. Feed him consciously, ensure his comfort, attend to his needs, treat him with dignity.